Ponder was sitting in the cockpit once again. This time they were ready. They'd done all the test flights. They'd done all their bad takeoffs and landings, and then they'd done good ones. 10 perfect landings, just like Feldspar said. Today it was finally time to prove they were ready to be an interplanetary explorer. Feldspar's final test was a marathon of increasingly challenging landings. The goal? To land in every major crater on Timberhearth. But Ponder found himself sitting and waiting, watching the house through the glass. Feldspar went back inside for something, said they'd be right back. Ponder was about to shut everything down and go check on him, when Feldspar and Chuck strolled out of the house together. Feldspar gestured and yelled. The short Harthian disappeared from view under the nose of the ship. Ponder unbuckled from the pilot's seat and made their way to the hatch to see what was going on. The young adventurer peered down through the rounded hatch. Feldspar didn't bother to come aboard. "I gotta run one of Hornfell's science errands around dark Bramble," they called up. Ponder glanced back at the cockpit, confused. "Should I come?" "Nah, you go fly that course we planned. Just forget about that last crater." "You mean alone?" Ponder asked nervously. "Nope," they motioned to Chuck. "Charty's gonna keep an eye on you." The taller being ducked under the fuselage and peeked into view. She smiled with those big teeth. She seemed quite pleased with this arrangement. Feldspar's parting words were, "Careful with my ship. Careful with my girl. Don't do anything I would do." With that, the old pilot turned and shuffled off to start fueling their own ship. Chuck stepped into the middle of the Nomai transport beam under the hatch. She hovered up, same as anyone else. But there was something about the way her tentacles swished down behind her, almost like she pushed herself up into the ship. They were face to face now in the small interior. "Hope you don't mind the change of plans," she said. "No, as long as you tell them what a good job I did," Ponder replied. "You got a spacesuit?" Chuck was still in her usual getup. "Don't worry about it." She was very casual about the whole thing. "The only difference with me coming along, you need to adjust the takeoff weight." They made their way to the cockpit. Ponder sat down and found the input for the load compensator. The mass of the fuel, cargo, and passengers had to be added before each flight so that the computer could calculate acceleration and inertia correctly. Thanks to Slate's ingenuity, the computer would even track how much fuel was burned during the flight and adjust for the loss of mass accordingly. But it was already at the correct setting. "I know how to set the load, but it's already set for me and Feldspar. Difference between you two shouldn't cause a problem." She spread her hand on her chest. "Well, I am flattered." She held back a grin and watched for a reaction. "But you're going to want to compensate 950 kilos. Make it an even 1,000 to be safe." Ponder's eyes bugged out for a moment until they regained their cool. How could she weigh 1,000 kilos? The average Harthian was about 60 kilos. Heck, the ship was only 5,000. And how could she sit in a rocking chair and not break it? It didn't make any sense. But Ponder had learned she was a little sensitive about those kind of questions. They turned the load dial and kept turning it until it matched her advice. Ponder put on their helmet and did exactly what they trained to do. As Timberhearth rose over the horizon, the brave little ship kicked off and rose to meet it. Straight up and straight out. Ponder focused, watching the gauges and keeping the altitude steady. Before they knew it, they were cutting the throttle and settling into orbit. "How was that for a liftoff?" Ponder asked. "Relaxing," Charty decided. Dad's never really satisfied until they're pulling G's. Ponder oriented the ship to face Timberhearth and got ready to navigate toward the first crater. "You've flown with them a lot. I'm sure you've picked up on some things." "I know a thing or two, but I can't be a pilot. It just wouldn't work." If I can learn, I'm sure you could too. You'd think so. Chuck shook her head. I've got my own instincts for moving through space. Trouble is, those instincts are all wrong for a spaceship. Never could handle the controls. She looked down and fidgeted with her tentacles. Dad tried to teach me, but I couldn't stop crashing. Bonder glanced at her from the side, checking on her. Were you hurt? The ship was hurt a lot worse than I was, she said with a laugh. That was unsettling, but it made sense, given that she was dense. The flight through space to Timber Hearth went smoothly. There was no rush. Ponder pushed out from the moon's orbit and into an acceptable orbit around the home planet. The Cosmos did most of the work. Ponder waited until they were over the right side of the planet and slowed the ship down so that they dropped into the atmosphere. As long as they followed the golden rule of re-entry, bottom down toward the planet, it wasn't too difficult to control. The atmosphere was a lot thicker, and the gravity was stronger, so they had to open the throttle a little more in order to slow down. Bluish sky washed over the stars as they descended. Ponder brought the ship to a halt in the middle of the air, gauging how much throttle was needed to keep it at a steady altitude. They couldn't stop it from bobbing up and down a bit, but that would do. They moved side to side at about the same level. A little heavier, a little more resistance. The first 2 landings were a cinch. All that practice really paid off. Landing in home crater was no different than landing at the outpost, once Chuck pointed out a flat place to touch down. Little Wash was even easier. It was a tiny crater by comparison, but mostly empty. There was a stand of trees on one side and Cold Wash River on the other, but the middle was an open field. Straight down, straight up, and that's 2 craters conquered. The river had carved a tunnel through the rock. From there it flowed on into the neighboring crater of Big Wash Basin, home to the notorious Quantum Grove. That was their next stop. The lake in the middle of the grove was wide and shallow. The only worry was the confusing quantum phenomena. Trees and rocks would sometimes wander around and trade places with no explanation. Even the opening of the geysers could shift. That could be quite a danger. But all that danger could be avoided simply by watching the landing camera that pointed straight down out the bottom of the ship. It'll ruin your day if you take your eyes off it, Feldspar had told him. Both Ponder and Chuck watched the monitor, just to be sure. If our eyeballs are pointed at a screen that's hooked up to a camera that's pointed at the ground, Ponder wondered, how does that stop the ground from rearranging itself? That wasn't the first time they asked the same question. Chuck knew by now not to even try. That's more of a Gabbro thing. Just keep looking. The 2 of them stared at the monitor with superstitious intensity all the way down. Ponder had to blink once, but they made sure to blink the top eyes and bottom eyes separately. Chuck didn't need to blink. Splash! A mixture of smoke and steam swirled around the ship as it came to rest in the knee-high water. Both of them watched the trees and the shore for a while, waiting for any signs of mystical movement. Ponder blinked. They turned the other way and looked again. Nothing. Huh. The tower shard on the North Pole moved a lot more than this. Yeah, it's probably me. Charlie pulled her hat over her face. Ponder looked at the fuel gauge and back up. Maybe you just don't want to do it today. Wait a minute. Chuck made a suspicious squint. She leaned forward to look to either side. When she found the culprit, she gave a huff that fogged up the glass. Forget it. Spinell's here. Every time they talk to Dad, they keep raving about quantum fish. The next landing had no funny business, but 0 tolerance for error. Visitor's Gap wasn't like the other craters. The bottom wasn't rounded, but crisscrossed with cliffs, waterfalls, and rivers in uneven shapes. There was no flat area to touch down. The Nomai left a great bridge spanning the chasm. Over the eons, the ends of the bridge had broken off. In the middle, a pair of pillars held up a stubborn span of bridge. This made a smooth surface, raised up over the rocks and trees below, almost as if it were purpose-built as a landing platform. Ponder felt good about the approach until they were halfway down. Then it suddenly hit. It seemed smaller than they were expecting. What if one of the landing struts slipped off the side? The whole craft could tumble down and free fall sideways or upside down. That 40-meter drop seemed just as scary as the descent from orbit. Ponder started sweating. Are you sure it'll fit? Chuck was casually observing their performance. Dad lands on here to eat mallows and play harmonica. It fits. A gust of wind nudged him off course. Ponder corrected. As they came close to the ancient stone causeway, Ponder boosted up and brought the ship to a hesitant hover above it. They drifted back and forth, trying to line up perfectly. Just put it down already, Chuck teased. Ponder did and set the ship down easy. It was a perfect landing after all. Nice, Chuck encouraged. That's all the easy ones done. Last one's a bit tricky, but you're doing great. Easy ones? Tricky? Ponder didn't like the sound of that. I thought this was pretty tricky. Well, I guess they're all the same, Chuck said, reconsidering. It's all just straight up and down, after all. Ponder had adjusted quite well to flying in the new sky, and the little ship moved smoothly and confidently to the last goal. That didn't last. As soon as the destination came in view, the new pilot's nervousness flooded back. Instead of a wide crater, they'd come to the peak of a great snow-capped mountain. The top was burst open, like the opening at the top of a volcano. Instead of smoke, steamy vapor billowed out of it, and quickly turned to ice particles at the high altitude. Are you sure? It's not even a crater. Ponder tipped the ship forward. It bobbed up and down as they looked down the foreboding hole. Chuck wasn't fazed. Feldspar wanted it to be a real test. Yeah, but Feldspar was going to be here. Hey, I'm here, Chuck said with a bump from her elbow. I've got you. Ponder took a deep breath and hovered the craft over the geyser shaft. The landing camera showed a round Nomai platform waiting at the bottom. It's just straight down, just like every other landing. They descended. Sunlight left them as walls of ice and stone came up around them. The ship's headlights illuminated the way. When a cloud of steam engulfed the vessel for a moment, the lights bloomed off the vapors in a way that was more blinding than helpful. Ponder held their breath, descending at a careful, steady pace. They had to watch the instruments to keep the craft level. When the wave of steam cleared, the rocks were so close to the cockpit. Ponder moved back into the center of the tunnel. They went down and down, but it was still going. Finally, the welcoming platform was getting closer. They'd have to be careful, though, as there was a roiling chasm to each side of it. The Nomai must believe that this is possible. They must believe it's safe, or they wouldn't have a landing pad here. That was a comforting thought. A hot jet of water thudded against the hull of the ship. It rocked to the side. Ponder felt them tipping over, sliding off course, about to crash into the rocks. They jerked the stick the other way, firing the maneuvering thrusters on that side of the ship. They careened away from one wall toward the other. The G-forces pulled up and down, side to side, as the craft wavered back and forth. Ponder could barely see what they were doing. They weren't level. They were falling. Hit the gyros! Match velocity! Chuck snapped, and gestured frantically at the instruments. Ponder fought through the panic and engaged the stabilization system. The nozzles on every side of the ship let out calculated bursts of thrust without their input. The ship stopped pitching around and leveled out. They were once again holding steady in place, despite the geyser's forces. Pilot and passenger caught their breath. I know you want to fly manual like Feldspar, Chuck said. Even Dad has to use a computer sometimes. Going back to pilot control, Ponder didn't touch the stick, only eased the throttle down and watched the landing camera. In a moment, they were resting safely in the middle of the platform. That was too close. Ponder had the shakes again, like when they crashed at the outpost. Chuck shook him out of it. Congratulations, pilot! She goaded him into a clammy high five and grinned. I'll tell him you passed the test. No trouble. Ponder's nerves gave way to a swell of pride and accomplishment. Yeah, I'm a real pilot now. Her face fell as she had a sad thought. I guess you'll be leaving soon, huh? Now that you're a real pilot. Ponder laughed. No, I'm just getting started. This is just the basics. The only thing I've learned is how to go straight up and down. I want to be more like Feldspar. Oh, in that case, you'll be a while, Chuck shot back with a sarcastic tilt. But once you're better, you'll be off, right? Will I still see you again? I plan to go off exploring on my own, sure, Ponder nodded. But I'll be back. Honestly, learning and living with you and Feldspar has been the most fun I've had in ages. After a short breather, they took off again. The ascent was much easier than the landing, since they weren't fighting against the flow of the geyser. Once they got to open air, Ponder navigated toward another spot on the planet. Chuck was confused. Aren't we going back home? I reckon we've got enough fuel for one more stop. There's one more crater to go before I can say I've got 'em all conquered. Dad said we can skip Youngbark Crater, Chuck reminded. Everybody says to stay out of there. What's down there? Ponder asked. I don't know. Chuck went silent. That only fueled the young explorer's curiosity. Well, we don't go along with everybody. They're just scared of what they don't understand. Feldspar told me not to go there, Chuck warned. Oh. That made Ponder think twice. They didn't say anything, but they didn't change course. Why are we still... Chuck wondered. There's no harm in looking, Ponder said with a sly smile. Besides, people told Feldspar not to go to the core and the Bramble, but they went anyway. Their expression reminded Charty of Dad. And that didn't go so well. They turned away from the windshield and met her eyes. I think it went pretty well. Gosh, they got her there. Almost got her flustered again. She matched their smile. You know what? You're right. I was a small fry when Dad told me that anyway. I'm old enough to decide for myself. Yeah, I'd say so, Ponder agreed. It's got to be something cool. Cautiously and curiously, the two misfits approached Youngbark. The ship peeked over the lip of the crater as they tried to see where they could land. What were they even looking at? There weren't many trees left. Harthians moved about between benches and stalls and structures. It was a work camp to be sure, but just what were they doing? A big it dominated the center, suspended from a crane. The dark orb had strange spines and folds, and holes. Holes that were lit by a pale light from within. It didn't look like anything else on Timberhearth. Something's not right, Ponder said, finding a clear place to touch down. Charty hugged her arms across her chest. I've got a funny feeling about this place. The ship dropped down as an unwelcome guest, kicking up dust and smoke. Ponder took off their spacesuit and hung up the pieces next to the other equipment. Chuck hesitated at the exit. There's a lot of people here. I think we're going to get in trouble. They shouldn't be hiding this. It's not the Harthian way. Ponder made sure their good luck pine seed was tucked in their hat, then hopped down through the bottom hatch. The two of them set out to explore the frontier of what should have been their own backyard. As Ponder approached the thing, it was almost too alien to take in. It was the strangest, well, maybe the second strangest thing they'd seen in a long time. It was a great ball of brown and black and green, a plant of some sort, inside a woody shell. Spikes protruded out of it, some as long as a meter. It was covered in alien blooms of 4 giant petals each. The broad, leaf-like plates were rot-gut red and glossy, reflecting the light from within. And what was in the middle of each sticky flower? Nothing. A void. A hole. And beyond, a ghostly fog. Ponder shivered. This thing, this awful thing, was hoisted up over a sawmill. A rough, twisting trunk was growing out of the bottom, and the workers had pulled it onto the saw table. Other broken stumps told the story of an unkillable source. It couldn't be stopped, no matter how many times they cut it. And all around were black planks, piles and piles of unnatural wood, cut neatly and stacked for domestic use. Ponder marched off with purpose in their steps. Who's in charge? What's going on? One of the workers in overalls pointed up the rim of the crater to a porch of sorts. There an old Harthian sat in a chair, supervising and sipping from a mug of cocoa. Ponder rushed up the steps and got their attention. They gave a quick tip of their hat as hello before asking, "Who are you?" The old coot blinked in surprise, as if roused from a nap. They were wearing a beanie and a thick jacket. The red bandana around their neck was growing threadbare. It was more nostalgic than functional. "I'm Marl. This is the Blackwood Lumber Yard. Where'd you come from, kid?" Ponder gestured up to the sky. "I'm Ponder, the new astronaut." Marl seemed skeptical. "I didn't know they made those anymore." With pleasantries dealt with, Ponder cut to the chase. "Is that what I think it is? Why would you mess with something like that?" The old salt gave a smug grin. "Infinite wood." Ponder could barely contain himself. "You can get infinite wood from trees." "This grows much faster." Marl pointed to the crazy thing. "Look, it sprouts right out onto our saw table." Ponder wouldn't hear it. "It's bad. Real bad. And you know it." Marl frowned. "Of course it's bad. It's a dark bramble seed." "So why is it still here?" Ponder shot back. "It could..." They wanted to yell, but they lowered their voice as the reality hit them. "It could destroy Timberhearth." Marl nodded and fidgeted with the handle of the old axe that was propped next to their chair. "I wanted to cut it open and get rid of it piece by piece. The big brain said if we do that, it might explode and kill everyone. Turns out the inner layer's too dense to cut anyways, so they put me in charge to keep the thing from spreading. May as well put it to use." That was more reasonable than Ponder expected, but they still wrinkled their brow with frustration. "Isn't this just a temporary..." "Wait, who's that?" Marl shaded their face with their hand and squinted. "Eyes ain't what they used to be," they muttered. "Who's that? That's not Feldspar's pet, is it?" Ponder bristled. "Hey, don't be like that. She's a person, and she can visit any time she..." A change came over the old Harthian. Marl bolted up to their feet and looked them dead in all 4 eyes. "Tell me you didn't bring it here. What do you do? They can't be here." When Ponder left to talk to Marl, Charty stayed at the Bramble seed. It was familiar. It was more than familiar. She knew exactly what it was, by memory and instinct. She stepped toward it slowly. It couldn't hurt to look. It was just a plant. It couldn't go anywhere, couldn't do anything. She stopped about 10 meters away from it and just looked. Chuck left the Bramble when she was small. She'd never seen the Bramble from the outside, except through a telescope. Was she imagining it, or did it make a sound? Yes, a slow, steady breath. Breathing in, only in, forever. One of the crimson blooms was facing straight at her. The opening in the center was only the size of a dinner plate. She peered into the white mist. There was no sun in there, but there was a stale glow in the fog itself. The space inside the sphere could only be a few meters across, but she knew it wasn't. The mist was deep. It was the shore of an ocean of vapors. Seas inside seas. It was so strange to stand in front of it now, to see everything she'd been avoiding, condensed into one object. And these weirdos had hung it up like an ornament. It was home. Her whole homeworld was here, right in front of her. Just a trick of folded space. A plane of existence forced into unnatural shapes by twisting vines, locked in a grip stronger than iron. She didn't miss it. She didn't want to go back. She wouldn't need to. She cheated it when she left, but it would win in the end. Nothing really leaves the Bramble. She was worlds away from it, but it was already here, waiting for her. The world inside that ball was bigger than the one she was standing on. One day, maybe in 1,000 years, the place where she was standing would also be inside that ball. She should have been afraid of it. It wanted to feed her and consume her. That world didn't have any mercy for the things it birthed. It did scare her, but it also made her feel strong. In the middle of the bloom, spines curved inward like teeth. It was the first set of jaws. Inside were thorns and spines and teeth, jaws upon jaws, stomachs in stomachs, the devourer of worlds, endless hunger. The jaws opened. Slowly, with no more sound than a peeling onion, the bloody petals stretched away from each other. The bloom in front of her expanded. She stared into a kaleidoscope of horror, hypnotized by its fractal movement. The portal stretched wider. Every deathly blossom was growing and then shriveling. Crack! The unnatural wood creaked and popped as it expanded. No, it only stopped compressing itself. The petals dried up and fell away, but the holes kept opening further. The sphere of the seed grew larger. The crane creaked under the weight. Giant pools of white fog emerged in front of her. The gates were open. Her mind blurred. She always held back, always hiding, always holding it in. Why? The silent call from the seed turned into a roar. No, the roar was coming from her. She snapped awake. People were coming toward her, yelling at her. They were holding axes. Was she scared of them? Afraid to be seen? Afraid what they'd think? The beast, the hunger, the only thing that was ever real. She let it loose from the void inside her. She fell heavy onto the ground, tumbling out of that other space. She snapped her jaws at the blue aliens that surrounded her. She glared down at them and bellowed a challenge. She was the big fish now. They should be scared of her. The fragile little creatures ran away. They screamed and dropped their tools, fleeing in panic. Except for one. One strange little four-eyed gremlin wouldn't run. Bonders stopped in their tracks. Marl's workers scattered and ran past him, but Ponder just stared in shock. A giant, ungainly monster had replaced Chuck. Most of its body was a single terrifying face with massive jaws. The writhing mass of tentacles behind it could only lift its head a foot or two off the ground. The beast spun this way and that, flashing its tusks at any potential threat, or food. Its hisses and bellows echoed off the surrounding cliffs. A brilliant ball of light swung over it, held by a protrusion from its head. It turned to face Ponder. It was Chuck. Of course it was her. Those deep black eyes, those pale, swirling tentacles. Those big teeth weren't smiling now. Her white and blue makeup was stretched, no longer enough to hide the darker body underneath. Those eyes she painted on her cheeks were smeared. Her clothes were hanging uselessly behind her, only enough to hold a couple tentacles. Ponder gulped. Their bodies stiffened. Of course she was a monster. They already knew that. Ponder also knew she was Feldspar's girl. She was a friend. She was panting out loud, rapid breaths. She was wild and confused. Ponder called out to her, trying to snap her out of it. "Hey, girl! Hey!" She gave a raspy growl. "Chuck!" Ponder took an uneasy step forward. They held out their hand in a welcoming gesture. "Hey, Charty, it's me, Ponder." She went quiet. Ponder stood steady, still reaching out to her with a kindly expression. Her big breaths slowed down. A couple of tentacles curled around her face. She was feeling herself, aware of herself. "Easy, girl. You're all right." Ponder walked up to her, making sure to avoid sudden movements. They put their little hand on her face. It's a wonder she ever fit on the ship. The big creature began to shrink. She pushed her body back into the space between spaces. It took several moments to get herself back to her original size and shape. It felt like forever. It was humiliating. She was finally able to wriggle into her Harthian clothes. Ponder was there, reassuring her, but she could hardly look at him. Everyone was staring at her. They all knew what she was. Without saying a word, she power-walked back to the ship. Ponder looked back at the dark bramble seed with a pit in their stomach. The crane had failed to hold it off the ground. It didn't move anymore, and it didn't make any noise. Those sickly blossoms had shriveled and fallen off, but they had served their purpose. In place of little windows were great foggy gates, so wide that the orb could barely fit them on its surface. A ship could fly through there. A monster could come out. When Ponder came up the grav lift into the ship, they found Chuck leaning against the hull with her arms crossed. She looked like she was hiding. Well, it was no use hiding now. It was bright inside the ship now that her light was showing. Ponder handed her a boot and a black cowboy hat. She had left them behind in her hurry. "Do you hate me?" she asked. "Why would I?" Ponder said. "Because I'm an angler.